Welcome to the session number 2 of our Canvas Summer Academy. And once again, thank you for participating. For those who were on the first session, thank you for coming back. For those of you who are new, wish you a very warm welcome. It is our intention through this academy to put some light on things that we think are particularly important in this moment for movements and activism. And we started Tuesday focusing on where are the movements from 2019, which was such a fruitful year when it comes to the people power. We had some amazing guests talking about their achievements in places like Sudan and Bolivia. We were looking at how this changed in 2020, which brings us to today's session, which is a session of activism in the time of pandemic. So within few months, with discovery and spread of the novel coronavirus, the world had inevitably changed. How this impacts movements, how this impacts struggles for human rights and democracy, how this impacts human behavior, how this impacts innovation, and moreover, what can we learn which may be useful for us in order to strengthen our society and make them more resilient to human rights violation and democracy violations in the future, is something that we are going to take a look at now. We picked some extraordinary guests like last week for you guys, starting with Jem Garcia, the leader of Scarecrow campaign, coming from Philippines. Typical example of, populist government turning to be more and more authoritarian. And we are going to examine this impact of the pandemic on the authoritarian leaning societies and how authoritarians are actually enjoying it as a good weather. We'll move to Mohammed Al-Satri, whom I will be simply referring as Matt, because I have pleasure and privilege to know this brave guy. And we're going to look at completely another aspect. So how the groups that are predominantly human rights and pro-democracy and civil rights can flourish and actually transform themselves strategically to be the community support in the times of coronavirus pandemic, and what may be the outcomes and lessons and results. And we consider this particularly important because this is a lesson we will draw for future. We'll end our panel with my long-time friend and amazing activist and PhD and the best samba dancer I've ever met in a lifetime. She also plays guitar, great Cecilia Lero, who joins us from Brazil. The typical case study where the government ignored coronavirus. We have a very sloppy response with the tragic results of thousands of people dead. So how do you mobilize the people in the time of pandemic when the government is absent or even worse? We'll try to answer your questions. Once again, start using chat now. So what will happen is that our guest panelists will answer the questions from the chat starting from now. I will join them in the time when they speak. And at the second part of this session, we are going to focus more on these questions. I will draw them from the chat. I will point them to the panelists. So we'll enjoy their answers and maybe some of my answers as well. We were super happy with the number of questions in our first session. Please stay vigilant, please stay active. This is made for you and your questions rather than us showing you how smart asses we are. So I'll start with a quote from Albert Einstein, who said that in the midst of every crisis lies a great opportunity. So a little bit of spark of the optimism in these bleak times. And obviously we can see how the pandemic changed the world and how extraordinary measures are changing the world. And there are several really good reports, the latest one coming from Carnegie, looking into how actually these conditions are used by autocratic and semi-autocratic governments to shrink civic space, how physical distancing actually disable activists to work, how this have removed almost every single topic from the agenda in the media aside of dealing with pandemic, and how everybody can be easily accused. So when you're protesting, you're actually spreading the virus. But rest assured that activism is always about the innovation. It's always about adaptation. And we've already seen the numerous examples of people organizing within the weird conditions to protest. The picture on the left-hand side of the screen is from Israel when Bibi Netanyahu sworn for I don't know which time again, and his trial on corruption started, the large demonstrations were made in the main Tel Aviv square. The way they are made was that the activists organized physically distanced demonstration. These were the first one in the line. There were many. After well-disciplined, they filled the square with less than 2,000 people. More than 2,000 people was organized in similar streets abroad. We see completely different approach, for example, in Poland and so many other places, Brazil included, moving from concentration, which can be complicated under social distancing, into dispersion, hitting pots and pans, car driving protests, combining online protests with offline protests. So you mobilize people online, but they do things at home. So what they do, they'll put a flag or a banner in the window and then share it on the online platform. So numerous innovations all over the place. We'll touch some of them speaking to our panelists. Also, another topic appeared. However, these can be very nice time for populists and autocratic leaning leaders to say, oh, you know, we'll just lock you down and there will be no protests. And there is an accountability problem. And as well as the corruption and bread and butter issues, as we discussed in our last session, tend to be the soft belly of dictators all over the world in the normal times, seems that the accountability for handling the coronavirus may be the soft belly of your governments throughout the time, because many of them screw up. And in the times of crisis, people expect leadership. And if there is no leadership, people will hold leaders accountable. And where we are talking about the iconic video coming from Belgium, the nice black limousine is their prime minister. She's driving her motorcade through the health workers. Belgium is the one of the countries in Europe with the largest number of dead people per capita due to the coronavirus. And then you have health workers turning their back. And this is a perfect example of how a guild organization, especially the first-time responders, can organize and send a very powerful visual message. No problems with social distancing. Nobody can be accused that they are spreading the virus, but it's pretty clear what they think about how the government handled the pandemic. From there to the beaches of Copacabana, and the situation in which very tricky, risky dilemma action thing was done by Brazilian activists by digging the mock graves in the country where actually a lot of real graves are made every day in order to do the public awareness rising on the coronavirus handling of Bolsonaro, who up to now stands as my personal champion of sloppiness when it comes to the handling this virus. Another thing is that, you know, dictators love extraordinary measures. And when we were under NATO bombs in 1999, Milosevic seemed invincible. He locked down the opposition. He killed ordered the killing of leader of the largest Serbian independent news outlet. And he looked completely invincible. When countries under the external threat, everybody rallies around the leadership, and that comes from our cave selves and the way we were dealing with threats while we were living in caves. If there is a bear in front of the cave, we'll figure out how to cooperate till we get rid of bear and then go back to our normal quarrels. But this outlines the larger question. If you take a look at Serbia, if you take a look at the Belarus, if you take a look at the United States, you see explosions of protests. And are these explosions somehow related for keeping people steamed in the pot for a long time, and then only spark is needed for this outrage to come out? Where this outrage is productive, where these are the viable movements, we can agree or disagree, but we may be well witnessing the world of protest as soon as extraordinary measures were being canceling in different countries. Last but not least, but actually the most important, is this phenomenon. It's like how pandemic and total lockdown can be the opportunity for progressive movements, because it can. And Matt from Malaysia will explain you how they did it. And there were several organizations across the globe who really did this serious playbook. So in the time of crisis, if you help your neighbors, if you use your networks, if you use your credibility, if you use your platforms to help people, to get to the vulnerable groups, to get food for kids who can't get it in school, to get shelter for homeless people who can't lock down because, you know, for them, stay-at-home order means staying on the street, to get sanitizers like in Nicaragua and face masks to those in need, This can be a very interesting development. And when we look at certain societies, specifically Hong Kong, where government was really sloppy at the first wave of the pandemic, you see the existing networks of activists, and we all know there were protests in Hong Kong, actually turning into the community support groups. So that built numbers, that built reputation, because the friend in need is a friend indeed. Actually, there's a history of NGOs doing it well when the government didn't do it well during the pandemic. One of the cases is Myanmar, where after the typhoon in 2008, literally non-existing and marginalized NGOs stepped into affected areas, and where the government failed to collect corpses. So they were experiencing the disease outbreak. So it was actually the NGO people coming there as the first responders, helping communities and building their networks onwards. Same with Bolivia. We had Janice Vacadaza, one of the organizers of the group that were handling the large Amazon fires in Bolivia last year on our last session. And she told us a lot about how stepping in and helping firefighters and mobilizing people for first response was actually the spark for her movement, Standing Rivers, to gain numbers, to gain credibility, to get into the radar screen, and to get a good name among the people in Bolivia. A lot of these things are happening spontaneously, and we have seen a lot of the pictures like this one from Italy, where people were connecting, playing music from each other, playing the acts of compassion and support and solidarity among them. And the thing is like, yes, you can do it, but is this the opportunity for civic groups to step in? So why building community links and boosting morale is a key to this civic resilience? Is because your groups can connect people in the time of crisis, fear and atomization. Is because it can increase the participation. You're actually reaching to the people who are not necessarily interested in the topics that your groups are advocating, where these are the human rights, equality, democracy. It can help recruit volunteers. Many of the people will volunteer for the elderly in the times of crisis. And it also puts your opponent in the dilemma, because you're actually doing the good community work while you were considered not to be super popular with the government. So you're the problematic group with the government that asks questions that government doesn't like, but sees that you're actually helping neighborhoods and you're super popular with the people. So government is faced with the dilemma whether to endorse you, in which case you go mainstream, whether to crack down on you, and ending up being a crackdown of somebody who is feeding the homeless people on the street. How do you do this? The Met will say more, but the first step would be, of course, building a platform and coalition of willing, looking at the key affected groups and constituencies, and developing the effective tactics to do this. So with these three questions, how we are dealing with this, what is happening in the countries, what measures the governments are using to shrink existing space, and how the activists are dealing with it, which will be mostly delegated to Jan, how the groups adopt strategically, and how they build this community networks, which will be most of the Met's presentation, and how do we build accountability for those unaccountable and sloppy responding governments like the one in Brazil that we will be dealing with Cecilia. I will leave the floor to my fellow panelists. So Jan, I'm removing my PowerPoint. You can upload your PowerPoint. And for all of those you in the audience, please, the chat is yours. We'll be active answering your questions, and we'll make our presenters answer some of them at the end too.
Hello, everyone. So I'm here to share how the pandemic inspired us more to do more in order to change our society. So my first tagline for this presentation is we inspire change by building civic resilience through social solidarity. Amid the social isolation that we feel now, we need more social solidarity in order for people to realize how much we care and how much we want to change our society. So I would like to start with a situation that happened in the Philippines. We are already almost 7 months in community quarantine. Since the pandemic came, democratic spaces have been shrinking and more oppressive laws are being passed in the Philippines. The pandemic is our major problem, but the government response is incompetence and oppression. It is clear that they don't have a clear roadmap as to where we are going in this pandemic, and or how are Filipinos going to move on from the devastation we are currently experiencing. Our cases now is at 80, is almost 90,000. I wrote here 80,000, but it's more than 80,000 now. And the government's priority is to use this to limit our movements, to pass more oppressive laws like the anti-terrorism law that scares many of the activists. Anyone can be tagged as terrorist now. Even just donating for a cause can be a basis to call activists or advocates alike as terrorists. And press freedom, freedom of expression is being curtailed in our current society. One example is the arrest of Maria Ressa, the CEO of Rappler, and the shutdown of the biggest TV network, ABS-CBN. 11,000 people lost their jobs because of the political vendetta of the president. And our loans now is at 9 trillion, but the pandemic response has not yet improved. Instead, they are diverting the people's attention to who the real enemy is. It's COVID-19, but they're making enemies out of the activists who are really helping in the front lines, doing donation drives in order to show how to respond properly in this pandemic. And they contained this pandemic by shrinking democratic spaces and using military solutions instead of medical solutions to at least ease the worries of the people. We are now living in a climate of fear and impunity. We are scared every day on what will happen the next day to our fellow activists or to our families because there's no clear response on how do we move forward. So I would like to explain the important players now in the Philippine context. The biggest player is, of course, the Duterte government, the national government, and the supermajority in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Anything Duterte says, they follow. For example, the anti-terrorism law and other laws that they want to pass. For example, death penalty. They want more killings. Many people are already dying, but still the priority is death penalty. We also have local government units who are so confused as to what to do in order to respond to this pandemic properly. Some are doing well, but some are really left out in this current situation. We have non-government organizations. I can say they are one of the pillars of support that we have. They are helping the frontliners, showing what to do, what should the government do in order to uh, provide a better response in order to address the concerns, the economic crisis brought by this pandemic. We also have universities and academic institutions challenging the anti-terrorism law. We have students, the left movement, of course, a civic society. We have charitable organizations doing their best to help the vulnerable sectors who are greatly affected by this pandemic. And it goes to show that people really care about the fellow Filipinos. It means that this pandemic has given us a chance to show people that we really care, that we're not just activists, but we are people who care and who envisions an inclusive society, just and compassionate society for every Filipino. A society free from hunger, corruption, and injustice. A society where we can be whatever we want to be with, express freely without fear and discrimination. And it's like imagining a society where we walk freely without the fear of being killed in an instant. So we are now on a mission to share our stories, influence decisions, empower one Filipino and one community at a time. This pandemic, we started with some communities, some farming communities in the north. And this pandemic gave us a chance to expand to more communities. So indeed, just a little silver lining, there is an opportunity to help amid this crisis, to help the the fellow Filipinos who are suffering, one community at a time, and one Filipino being volunteers for this cause. And our immediate goal, initially, we want government action to address the impacts of rice tarification law to farmers. But now it's bigger. We are on a mission to be of help to our fellow Filipinos, to show how much activists care. That's why we want to change our society through social solidarity. So our mission is to move one ally at a time. These are the photos um, we had previously. We are trying to connect with the Social Action Center of the church. Now the church has been very vocal about that they're against the anti-terrorism law because it will shrink more democratic spaces. It will silence dissent, every single one. So how do we build civic resilience, or how do we do activism amid this pandemic? How do we build the hope for resistance? We establish partnerships and coalitions with different groups, organizations, be it consumers or the individuals who are also concerned as to how do we move forward with our goals. At the start of the pandemic, we called for mass testing. There are so many protests at home that was done. Filipinos really followed protocols. We stayed at home, we protested at home. But then the government didn't do anything to improve our situation. Our time at home was useless because it's still the same even after how many months. And the protest kept on going. We had Manyanita protest. It was a protest against the passing of the terror law, and many different organizations were there to show dissent. We also had online and street protests. People have different ways of showing solidarity. People who were in the streets to express bravely of what should be done to address our situation, while others are doing it in communities outside Metro Manila, doing donation drives, helping a fellow Filipino to cope with the current situation. So one thing that helped us get more volunteers is working really with the people at the heart of the problem. For example, in the scarecrow installations we had, these were done by farmers themselves. These are low risk but high impact tactics that we employed. So farmers can express that their dismay and disappointment that there's no subsidy going to them. So it helped us to get more people not to be scared. It lessens fear and get more involvement from people. So being creative in actions make people interested and participate more in terms of ideas and express solidarity through the ways they know. For example, this vendor, he is throwing a garbage in a garbage can where it says Duterte is a trash and he is rotten, throw it here. So it's a ibasura campaign because usually when we go to rallies, we always say trash, trash, or junk. Terror law, for example, it's always about trash and junk. And we want to associate trash and junk to these kinds of leaders that we have, the populist leaders who doesn't know how to respond and address the concerns of the Filipino people. So here are the things that we did. We had So Nagkaisa last July 27, participated by many groups. And if you can see in this trash image again, even the people that are not youth are participating because it's low risk and they feel that really Duterte administration is trash and we need to throw him. So what are the effect of our activities? More people joining our causes, showing solidarity through donations or through going to the streets. We gained support from local communities, even the local governments were turned to allies. And community volunteers are volunteering to help. These people do not speak of anything about politics before, but they're now on the front lines, helping a fellow Filipino to cope with the current situation. Many people rallied support for the 11,000 workers of ABS-CBN. These people we have not met, but we are behind them, supporting their cause to renew the franchise of the biggest TV network. These were covered many times by media since the mass testing now, PH call, and then the Manyanita protest, and many more creative activities were surfaced during the So Nagkaisa rally last July 27. So if you see, this is how the people responded, and this is the people in power responded. They responded with violence and very autocratic. And while the people, the compassionate Filipino people, helped each other in order to cope with the current situation of the vulnerable sector. Not just the farmers, but the jeepney drivers, for example, and those people are greatly affected by this pandemic. So peeking to the future, people now are thinking about actually election for 2022, but that's far, and we have whatever happens in 2022 depends on what we build today. So the challenges are the risk of being in the streets all the time. Our health system is collapsing. Our mental and emotional health are also collapsing as activists. Passing anti-terror law is even more scarier. And developments, well, because of that, shrinking spaces, activists learn to show dissent in the most creative ways they know. More organizations are gathering together, and the outcomes really are more people now are willing to act. I can see it in my high school classmates who do not want to talk about this before, but they are joining the movement. No terror law can scare us anymore. We are talking about our future and the future of our family. So to end this presentation, I would like to show you this quote. As individuals, we are limited in our own ability to make change happen in our society. As individuals protesting to an oppressive government, we have minimal power. As individuals standing against the tide of public opinion, we have little hope for exerting influence. As individuals, we are doomed to frustration and failure. But if we combine with others who share the same vision, values, and principles as ours, and map out a course of actions, we may be able to make the change happen. Through participation in social movements, we can break the social constraints that overwhelm us as individuals. Human beings are the agents of change if they choose to be. So the choice is ours, the choice is yours. The Filipinos toppled a dictator once. We will do it again. Let's go, Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Jem. Your story was really inspiring, and it was great to hear that you managed to spread your campaign all over Philippines and also to build solidarity network around farmers. Okay, our next speaker is Matt Muhammad from Malaysia. Let me unmute him. Okay, Matt, thank you for taking your time to join us here today. I know you are fighting many different battles in Malaysia right now, but this time we will speak more about your team campaign and how you fight COVID-19 pandemic. Please share your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jelena.
You're welcome.
Let me share my presentations. All right, so everyone, hello. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for Canvas team and for organizing this and inviting me. So, can you see my slideshow?
Yeah, we can see it.
Is it on slideshow mode?
It's on slideshow,
Right.
but yeah.
How about now?
We can do it like that, so please continue. Never mind. Yeah, great, perfect.
Right. So before I start, I just would like to say that I'm just a messenger for this movement, a big movement, and a lot of people have been involved in this movement. It's a lot of effort by every bit of person or people that we have. So this is activism during COVID-19, Malaysia. Cases of LIGA DEMOKRATIK. LIGA DEMOKRATIK is the name of this organization. It's translated to Democratic Youth League. All right, so what is the current situation in most important right now? So for you guys who didn't know, Malaysia just had our change of regime twice since in 2 years, right? So in 2018, we had a change of regimes after 63 years of the old regime called UMNO. So finally had our regime change. So under the new governments, NGOs and other pro-SG groups saw the lights for institutional reforms and extended engagement with the government. And we did have a lot of chances to talk to the new governments for political reform, institutional reforms, law reforms. Uh, and however, in March 2020, before the lockdown happened, the opposition's party, the former regimes, together with segments of the old regime within the government, staged a coup to change the governments and bringing the former regime's political back into the government's offices. So this is where we're at right now. And then the MCO, and then the COVID-19 crisis came, and we've seen a lockdown in Malaysia for almost 3 months, and we are still actually under not security law, but more on pandemic crisis law that are in place right now. So what's the most important player, institution, organization that influence this situation right now? So I would say that former regimes people who are lost power and they're now being investigated under various corruption issues. So they are now trying to retaliate with lots of accusations and also charge against them in the court or in the judiciary systems. And also oppositions in the government. Why I put the government in oppositions? Because all former regimes consisted of the people who are in the government and also within the opposition. So there's segment of people from former regime who due to the last elections change party to become part of the government's party. And opposition's party, which consists of largely Malaysian Islamic Party, civil servants, which I see a lot of sabotages, a lot of things that happenings during the after the change of regimes. It's not a lot of compliance amongst the civil servants towards the reforms that want to be done in Malaysia. I think there would be there's a lot of factor why this happens, and also royal institutions, because like I don't know if you guys know, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Mahathir Mohamad, was not very fond by the royal institutions. He's quite famous for try to I would say cut their powers through judiciary systems and also through parliament, so that our royal institutions won't have a lot of or too much power. So after he came back into power and we elected the government coalition selected my prime minister, so this saw a lot of raised a lot of eyebrows amongst the royal institutions, I would say. Explain about the organization movement. So what is LRD? What is Democratic People's League is? So it's born actually in 2015 after the breakup of the oppositions. So after the breakup of oppositions, we didn't see any other alternative that can challenge the former regimes. So the things that, oh my God, we're going to be under this regime forever if we didn't do anything. So we formed these organizations, which initially called Gerakan Anak Muda Malaysia, Demi Malaysia. It's called Malaysian Youth Movement. And after that, after 2018, we rebranded into Democratic People Leagues. And we get it registered under the Department of Registrar in Malaysia on 8th January 2020. So this is press conference establishment of LRD. So we had a big youth congress before the establishment of LRD. In 2018, we held a first youth congress in Malaysia to discuss a lot of youth issues, youth problems. So whoever can come and to give opinions and to talk on the Congress, and a lot of ideas, a lot of issues being thrown out in the Congress as well. So there's a lot of resolutions been passed in the Congress. Amongst it, the possibility of forming a youth political party, legalizing marijuana, a lot of things. So you name it, they got it. So explain the most important activities. So because I wrote a lot of things here, but I just want to explain these two things that we done during the COVID-19. First is the food aid. So we launched a nationwide food aid to help the needy, and also we did digital parliaments. So the food aid came first actually because at the start of the pandemic, uh, I gathered our teams, and we sat with Serja, and Serja gives some advice on how to move during the COVID-19. One of them providing people with aid, and also providing people with food, giving the needy what they need, and also giving support, whatever kind of supports. And in these situations, we saw a lot of Malaysians struggling with food, and also a lot of migrant workers, refugees, people who are already in. Uh,
Okay, Matt. So we lost you for a second, but please continue.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
All right. So during that time, initially we started a donation drive actually online. So surprisingly, we received a lot of donations, which initially we planned to donate to other people who are already doing this stuff, but because we got a lot of donations, so we started our own volunteer groups. So we started. So from March until now, we gathered almost 400,000 Malaysian ringgit, which I think amount to around $100,000 from people across Malaysia. And we pack food, we deliver to them, and it benefited, means near to 50,000 family across Malaysia. So we need a lot of partners. We need a lot of friends from inside KL, outside Kuala Lumpur to make this happen. So previously through the youth congress that we had previously that I said, so we were able to get the people to distribute the money and also the food that we gathered. And then that the Parliament Digitals, we partnered with a lot of people as well to gather 222 youth from every constituency in Malaysia, because previously the government, the current regime said that they couldn't hold the parliament session. So we said that the youth can do it through online. So we did discuss a lot of issues in this Parliament Digital. So this is the pictures. So you can see from the left side, a lot of volunteers, thousands of packed food, and the people delivering them, stacking them, and also it's a lot of people. It's a lot of fun, and also I met a lot of people, and it is a great experience for me as well. And at the bottom we have Parliament Digitals. This amongst the speakers, and also another banner is our partners in the digital parliament. So we able to get a lot of people to join us and make the digital parliaments a reality. Even we have UN youth. So what's the effect of the activities actually? So our below 40 society and migrant food aid have received almost 400,000 in cash and distributed almost 50,000 pack of food towards identified family and individuals. So we need local people to identify these people, because we can't identify 50,000 people, right? So we need people to identify them for us. So we need people who are living in flats, our friends living in those places, to get to talk to their neighbors actually, to ask them whether they need food or not. So through our digital parliaments, we held 2 days of sessions where preparations done a month before it. So we have 222 youth from all constituencies, because we have 222 constituencies in Malaysia. So we need one person for each constituency. So first day events, we got 25 delegates who are talking or debating on issues. So we get 11,000 views on our social media and 700 shares. So on second days, we get less because I think people, I don't know, but we had less on the second day. But I think the issue were discussed on the second day were more prominent, I think. I don't know why, we need to investigate on this further. So think on the future, what's next? So we will continue with the food aid because this is where we can gather people, we get people, we know people through this food aid, where people who haven't heard of us before, we can reach them. So we're also planning to have our second youth congress, probably online, I don't know. We'll see. And also LRD also plans to form a youth political party. So this still under discussions. We are talking to a lot of people. So it's a long road ahead for us. So challenges, development, and outcomes. So COVID situations, how long is going to be? So how long are we going to be in this situation? So we need to rethink our strategies a bit, because moving forward from this, we want to have a little bit of political moves, online protests, maybe things more, I would say, more radicals, because actually people are quite fed up with the current situation as well. If you read the news, the current situations in Malaysia, where the former regimes who are from the current regimes now are split into two as well, because their leaders, Najib Razak, have been found guilty inside the high courts. So they're split into two, but I couldn't say what was the effect of that on our parliament competitions, our government competitions. So, but the people are clearly fed up with the situations of politicking, of politicians continue to politicking during the crisis and not doing enough to help people. And also, what a lot of our online things, the parliamentary debate, and now couldn't really be translated into the physical activity. So we need to figure this out. We are straight figuring out on what we're going to do with these momentums and people that we have after the COVID crisis. And also political situations in Malaysia now move quite rapidly. So also we need to keep our head high a little bit to see what's coming, and also be vigilant of the situations. I think that's from me. Thanks.
Okay.
If there's any questions.
Okay, we will do questions later. Thank you,
All
Matt,
right.
for your presentation, and keep up with good work. I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker, Cecilia Arlero. She is originally from Philippines, but she spent last couple of years in Brazil, and we are all hearing stories from there, and we know that Brazil is now one of the most affected countries at this point. So Ceci, I will leave it to you to tell us more about situation there.
Great, thank you, Yelena. I'll just share my screen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, perfect.
Okay. So as Yelena said, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, Brazil is one of the hardest hit countries, largely because of the government, largely because the president, Bolsonaro, basically denies that COVID is like a thing, is a problem. The first big televised press conference he did after the Ministry of Health started recommending, and a lot of the local governments started recommending for people to self-quarantine, to be careful. He went on TV and he said that it's just a little flu, it's not a big deal, it's only going to very few people are going to die, and the people who die are going to be the unproductive members of society anyway, and basically saying that Brazil can't stop. We can't put. We have to put the economy above dealing with this disease. And so Brazil is one of the hardest hit countries. By last count, there are over 80,000 have died. And so in addition to that, Bolsonaro has been a really contentious president. He's part of this wave of ultra-right populist authoritarians And so it's been quite contentious ever since he came to power in the beginning of 2019. So when we look at the current situation and its most important elements, we have Bolsonaro and his closest allies. So within his ruling coalition, he's actually fought with a lot of high-up people in the Supreme Court as well as the legislature. So it's potentially an opening, but his closest allies are big capital, who of course just want the economy to stay open. And there's like an ideological block of like far right people who aggrandize the military dictatorship that Brazil had in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, people who believe in very conservative values. And so they're basically denying there's a health crisis. There's been lots of instability in the cabinet where loyalty is valued over science. So since the pandemic started, we're now on our third health minister. The first one, who was a guy who represented like the private insurance sector and who was very active in trying to dismantle the public healthcare system. When the pandemic started, he started wearing like the vest of the public healthcare system and saying that we really need to attack this as a healthcare issue, presumably because even as someone who wanted to dismantle the public healthcare system, it was obvious that the size of this pandemic was such that the private sector couldn't handle it alone. He was fired, then the second one was hired and then fired because the president wanted him to endorse the use of hydrochloroquine like wantonly, like over the counter. There's also he also fired one of the most popular ministers, his justice minister, who was involved in a lot of corruption investigations. Again, the private sector and as well as the military and high-ranking politicians have taken sort of a more moderate tone. So the military in particular is still in the ruling coalition, but they've taken care to distance themselves by saying that like the disease is real and that they're willing to help. But they haven't actually done anything particularly effective to help with the health situation. And then, of course, you have progressive social movements and parties who are really in a bind right now because you have this situation where there's such an opportunity created by the utter bungling of Bolsonaro of the situation, but they're still obviously concerned with their base, right? So social movements, progressive social movements and democratic social movements have this restriction that the authoritarians don't have, is that they actually care if people die. And so there's this tension between wanting to mobilize, being able to mobilize because people are upset and people want to get out of their homes, but being concerned with the safety. You also have a hard situation where the base of the democratic movements tend to come from the poorest sections of society. And so mobilizing is also hard because people are struggling for basic goods, for basic needs. They're the ones most hit by the economic situation. And so political movements are also more difficult because the social movements are mobilizing all their resources to like raise money for food, to raise money for sanitation items, and doing less sort of what we would call political campaigning. But of course, we'll see later that those are one and the same. And then another important point is that there are municipal elections in November. So in municipal elections, that includes the mayors and the city councils of the biggest cities in the country. So here, Sao Paulo, for example, and this is really important because this is where most of the revenue in the country comes from. So explaining the battlefield. So again, as I said, we have the president and the ruling coalition. So military, big capital, coalition parties. So the president has been in a fight with the biggest coalition parties in the legislature over his really erratic handling of the crisis. as well as questions about his personal family's corruption, his desire to control on a personal level the military police, as well as the judiciary. And there has been an impasse between him and the Supreme Court because opposition parties in the legislature have been asking that the results of his coronavirus test be made public. And that actually went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that he has to make it public. So then he started saying that, these institutions are all against me, they're all unfair, that media is also against me. Media has been also attacking the president. There is one company in Brazil that has 98% of market share, that's global, and they've been highly critical of the president to the extent where the president actually tried to hide the coronavirus numbers, which is something happening in the Philippines as well. But the curve has not been flattened at all. It keeps growing. And Bolsonaro first tried to release the numbers after the evening news every day. But what Global did was interrupt like their soap operas or whatever they play after the news and give the numbers at that moment. And then after that, Bolsonaro pulled a Trump, or actually he pulled it before Trump pulled it, and tried to instruct the state level ministries of health not to release the numbers publicly. But actually the governors, in fairness, and I don't have it on this slide, the governors and the mayors have been generally not, some have been following Bolsonaro's line, and we have some studies looking at the extent to which party affiliation affects the response, but a lot of them have been just dealing with the crisis based on their own priorities and not necessarily in lockstep with the federal government. Going back, the large neo-Pentecostal churches. So these big, like, mega churches are a big part of Bolsonaro's ruling coalition. And within the evangelical movement, there's a split. So you have these big sort of national churches who are also involved in a lot of corruption scandals themselves, who are telling people to, just pray and it'll be fine. But then you have the local level churches, the small, less organized, or not less organized, but less within the hierarchy churches who are doing a lot of the frontline work and who are encouraging people to take the appropriate precautions. And then, of course, on the opposite side to the president ruling coalition, you have the opposition political parties and progressive social movements. So the important activities and tactics, everyone is mobilizing for the provision of basic goods for communities in needs. Those cestas básicas are like, you have a set of like rice, beans, some canned goods, pasta, and the idea is to deliver these to the communities that need them. And groups, even groups that are not active politically necessarily, are taking a stand in the really mobilizing to do this. You have a lot of artists doing live concerts on YouTube or whatever, who are all raising funds for cestas básicas, the samba schools, of course, churches and football clubs are all doing this social work. Noise barrage. So when the lockdown first started, especially in the middle class communities, you would hear, so the president, this is a tactic that dates back to the dictatorship period from several countries. The president would give his nightly address around 8:30, and people would go to their windows and bang their pots, play anti-dictatorship music, yell out, get out Bolsonaro, to make sure that, people on the street knew which side we were on. And that was sustained for at least 2 weeks. And it got to the point where broadcast news started reporting it from different areas. Of course, online information sessions and debates. So there's almost saturation of the amount of live discussions that are going on. The campaign for Renda Básica. Renda Básica is, it's like a universal basic income. So this is across a campaign across many different social groups and political parties and NGOs, etc. We got Congress to approve 600 reais, which is less than $200 a month per worker. And now we're in the campaign for Renda Básica Part 2, which we're asking the government, or demanding that the government extend that through to December. Alternative sources of information about COVID. Since this government, the federal government absolutely is blocking information, we also have it also has a very robust fake news infrastructure. Opposition politicians, in particular the former health minister, have put up their free WhatsApp numbers, sort of like the WHO has put up something similar where people can ask questions, daily summaries of the COVID situation to combat a lot of the fake news about hydroxychloroquine, about that masks don't work, etc. Targeting campaign donors. So in the past, I think less than a month ago, a chapter of Sleeping Giants was formed in Brazil. For anybody who doesn't know, Sleeping Giants is like a Twitter campaign that asks websites, informs websites when there's advertising for like a fake news site or like these ultra right hate groups, and asks it targets the big businesses whose ad buys appears on those sites and asks them to adjust their ad buys accordingly. A multi-boy strike. So multi-boys are like the people who deliver things via motorcycles, and they've been like the lifeblood, of course, of delivery services since the lockdown, since the quarantine, and have been hugely underpaid. So they've also begun to organize and have periodic strikes to demand better wages from both the restaurants and companies they work for, but also like these big agglomerations like Uber Eats, like iFood. We have, for example, in Brazil, in Southeast Asia, the equivalent would be Grab. And of course, election preparation. So, Brazil is still an electoral democracy. So the opposition parties are absolutely preparing for the elections, getting the city and state of Sao Paulo, for example, and also of Rio, are run by super right-wing guys who were allies of Bolsonaro during the election, but then started distancing themselves since the pandemic, and even a little bit before the pandemic. And so getting these big cities in the hands of people who actually care about science would be a big deal. So some photos about the situation. This is a photo from a friend of mine. His Instagram is there. If you want to follow him, please follow him. He's really good. This is actually the Cemitério São Luís that's here in Sao Paulo. And this is this is just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the situation. This is not a propaganda. This is real. These are the real graves. These are some photos from the panelazo, from the noise barrages that we have. So in addition to, I didn't want to show you a video of pots banging. Oh, another thing, some people recorded pots banging and the big horns from the big semi trucks, so that people wouldn't have to break their pots. So because I'm lazy, I put that recording on a speaker and put it on loop and put it in my window. So anyway, during the noise barrages, people were also projecting these images on big buildings in the big cities. So the one on the far left says, "Get out Bolsonaro." The one in the middle says, that's a direct quote from his first speech. It's just going to be a little flu, ha ha ha. And the third one is, "Bolsonaro's done." This is the biggest sort of opposition mass gathering, and it's kind of controversial. So for many weeks, every Sunday, the pro-Bolsonaro forces, 150 people, 200 people, would gather around Avenida Paulista, which is this big avenue in Sao Paulo where a lot of mobilizations traditionally happen. And the opposition was not calling for mobilizations because like it's really irresponsible. So what happened is that a lot of the football clubs said, well, we're going to organize because we're not going to let these like fascist coddlers organize and not let us respond. And so you have, what you see on the right side are the three big football teams in Sao Paulo, which hate each other, but who like got along during this protest. But of course it's the Corinthians, the black team, which is my team, which led the protests. So it was kind of controversial because what you have is, you know, a system of a situation where you have a pandemic, you have a lot of, you know, the football club members, a lot of them who come from the poorer neighborhoods, agglomerating. But the week after this happened, a lot of the political parties, the youth movement, the Black movement, this was also around the time when George Floyd was killed in the US, said that they were going to go and back up the football teams. And so they had a bigger mobilization. And so there hasn't been a big mobilization since then, but I think the point is that it's hard to judge because yes, it's not the most responsible thing to do at this time. At the same time, it definitely did shut up a lot of the pro-Bolsonaro forces who were like, it basically helped to stop their momentum because they had been mobilizing by themselves without a response for so long. And then here are some of the community work that has been happened. So on the far left, you see that's the like logo for the Renda Básica campaign, the Universal Basic Income campaign. And what I want you to notice is that there's no like one party that's dominating the campaign. The colors that are used, the color scheme are like happy colors, and they're colors that are not associated traditionally with any social movement, any like particular social movement in Brazil. And then under you have all of the NGOs and groups that have signed on to support this campaign. In the middle center, the upper center, this is an action by the movement. It's the homeless workers movement, which for many years has been organizing to do occupations of unoccupied buildings in the city for homeless people. And they've been really good about distributing cestas básicas, so like the basic needs, you have cleaning supplies. And on the far right, this is actually a group that I spent the whole day with yesterday, and they're doing really amazing stuff. So this is a group called G10 Favelas. This particular community is the community of Paraisópolis, which is the biggest favela, the biggest like urban slum here in Sao Paulo. There are 100,000 people who live in this slum. And before the pandemic, they were organizing a lot of programs about employment and entrepreneurism in the favela, as well as G10 favelas, because they're also doing creating a network with other favelas in the country. So it's like the G7, but the G10, because the idea is to look at poor areas as a place of economic excitement as well. Since the pandemic started, they organize street presidents. So street presidents are like representatives from every street. So you see that in the upper picture. And they were trained to monitor their neighbors for their needs as well as their health conditions. They are responsible for distributing basic needs, and they got a first aid training. And within the favela, they now have are employing people making masks. They converted schools into isolation wards because the schools are obviously not working. They also have a program called Adapta Diarista. A lot of people who, like, for example, contract out their work for daily don't have work anymore. And so they're creating partnerships with the private sector to like make sure these people still have regular salaries. And under that, you also see mobilization, a socially distanced mobilization that they organized. This favela is right outside the governor's palace. And so they blocked the road in front of the governor's palace, demanding that the government like pay attention to their needs. So the effect of these activities, Bolsonaro's popularity has taken a huge dive since it began. And also, as Sir said earlier, we've been highlighting the importance of, the government isn't doing anything for you. So it's important to create these independent poles of power and communities that are self-reliant. And so what comes next? The real test is the upcoming municipal elections, and gaining controls of the major cities would dramatically change how COVID is being addressed. The military and big capital are big questions. So there are a lot of analysts who think that the military has never really been wholeheartedly in support of Bolsonaro. And it's worth noting as well that the vice president is a military general. And so it's sort of this question that we're constantly discussing, is the military going to try to take over, looking at recognizing Bolsonaro's utter incompetence. It's not clear because he's giving them all the concessions at this point. So it's not clear that they need to, or they're just like extracting, at what point they're going to like saturate everything that they're extracting from him right now. We assume that big capital will unite behind another sort of moderate or like middle or right politician, but negotiations are ongoing, so we don't know who they're going to put as their candidate for the next, if they're going to like wait out the rest of Bolsonaro's term, or if they're going to try to do something beforehand. And the big question, I think, is if progressive movements can use this demonstration of government neglect to strengthen their bases. So a big part of the reason why Bolsonaro was elected to begin with is that you have a lot of people who were just disenchanted with the political system in general and wanted to vote for like a guy who came out of nowhere, for no party, for no organization. And it's been slow going for progressive movements. You have a lot of people who are outraged, but who aren't ready or willing yet to be organized. And so I think that's the real question, is to turn this mobilization into organization. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Tsatsi, thank you for sharing these interesting examples of activism with us. Now it's time for your questions.
Hey, yeah. The questions were many, and we did a hard work trying to address some of them. And thank you for the questions, first of all. And I'll start by answering one, which is one of my favorites. And the question is how to innovate and stay ahead of the game when the government is up to speed with most methods and tactics. That's wrong approach. In order to win in sports and nonviolent struggle, it's not looking at the tactics, it's looking at the strategy. And in sports and nonviolent struggle, you win only if you score. So you will never win by being defense in football, or being a defense in a basketball, or waiting for your opponent to do something and be reactive in the politics. So the thing is, you need to know what you want. You need to take a look at the pillars or institutions you want to affect. You want to be making an offense to these institutions, and this is the way you win. I'll give you the recent example from US. For years, everybody who was visiting US was aware that they'll like every 2 or 3 weeks, with this concentration of guns, there'll be a crazy kid coming to the high school and shooting several peers. And we're always witnessing the same scenario. The large mass of protests in front of parliaments and city halls in the towns affected, the Democrats coming out asking for more gun control, Republicans coming out saying the response should be to arm the teachers so they can defend themselves. Yes, actually, this is what is happening. And then the whole thing died. But then 2 years ago, when the shooting happened in Parkland, Florida, the things were quite different, because the bunch of high school kids actually did their targeting job well. So instead of going in front of the city halls and state capitals, where the politicians wouldn't respond to them, but they respond to their lobby groups because they don't vote, in US, you're not eligible to vote until the age of the 21, they would look at the places where they were eligible. So they were threatened to boycott the Walmart. So they say if the Walmart doesn't put the restrictions or background checks on guns on the counters, we won't be buying in it. And now the Walmart got scared, and Dick's Sporting Goods got scared, and the Amazon got scared. So immediately they got to their goals to increase the background check where the firearms are spread. They couldn't influence the politicians, but they could influence the business. So this is typical the way where you're looking ahead of your opponent, and we're looking at the things you want to achieve. And instead of waiting for your opponent to pull the move, you say, okay, if we can't go through right door, we need to go through the back door. And then you find the back door, which is a completely different pillar, and you work with this pillar. So if you want to win in politics, life, or sports, you need to score, you need to take an offense. Now I picked some questions that I think would be nicely distributed to different speakers. I'll start with one or two addressing my friend Jen from Philippines. The first question is how you engage in both disruptive mass civil resilience and at the same time the wholesome community report. Doesn't this crack a movement? I wonder if we recruit a bunch of people who are more interested in community support, it may liberalize the protest movement, it may make him lame. And also how we can break through the people's apathy in the time of COVID, where they both have economic and health concerns. So can you please unmute Jan?
Yeah, Jan, you can speak.
That's a tough question. Yes, first I would like to say that people are really more interested into helping or being involved in community support because that's the easiest one. But we need to continuously engage these people in order for them to become our allies. So intimate conversations from families, friends, and acquaintances are important if we want to convert people to become part of our movement. Because we have to float the idea that this is not sustainable. What we are doing now, relief drives, this is just temporary. What we need is to move forward, a step ahead in moving towards our vision. So this is only possible if we continue to talk to these people, starting from family and friends, and um, getting more people from friends of friends and distant relatives. So I think that made it easier for us to get more volunteers and the low risk tactics that we did, for example, the trash cans, even vendors participated because it's not really provocative and you can say that it's in the trash because it's trash. So it's not something about terrorism activity or what. So I think what really will encourage people to join is to make them realize where are they in your vision, what contributions can they do, or the little things that they can contribute to make them feel that they're part of the vision that you want to achieve. So I think that's helping us in our mission, one person at a time. Thank you.
Okay, Jen, thank you for this answer. Question number two, I got a lot of questions for Matt. I think this is I try to sublime them into two. So if we do community support, Matt, and outreach, and we do a good job of building relationship and reputation, what is the best way then to move? What is the momentum to move to the political conversation, to the real rights issues, to the democracy issues? So should we request to run workshop, invite people to events? And also how do we maintain the energy and momentum in order to be successful?
All right, I think to answer that questions, first of all, depends on every nation, every country on how you do it, because it's kind of like a implementary or strategy questions. But for us, how we do that is first, I think while doing charity or community support, it is in a way telling people out there say that the governments are not doing their job well in providing basic supplies to the ordinary people. That itself, the action itself is actually a political move. But for us to translate it, or like to move this towards a more political discussions, that's why we established the digital parliaments. So we put, or there's a lot of LRD people inside those digital parliaments. So we highlighted what we did throughout the COVID-19 crisis, and also we explained to them. So that's where we put our discussion and efforts to this, explaining what we do and what the situation is through the digital parliaments. But you can be creative on how you want to do this. I think depends on you as well. It can be a form of I would say it's online again also, because what you do is things that you do during the crisis or lockdown. So you can be creative about this. But just want to highlight the impact of the digital parliaments to you guys is that few of the people or debaters into sessions were called to the police stations to be questions about things that they said within the discussions. This means that people do take notice, even the authority do take notice on people talking about the crisis, or when you start talking or start organizing things like this within the skills that we did. I think if that answers your questions.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much for this. I've seen you answer the very interesting question of how you organize packing and distribution of the food. And thank you for doing this, because this is a really technical but very important question. Okay, last but not least importance, I have two very different questions for Ceci. One is how to manage the success of governments institutions ramping up in their measures to squash activism. Are we doing well? Are they doing well? And also how to maintain motivation. And I know you love to talk about the small victories and how they boost the morale and how they're important in nonviolent struggle. And yet another one is completely different, which is when you take a look at what happens in US, you see the two different BLMs. So some of them are super nonviolent. Some of them are saying, okay, we are angry, we have right to burn things. So how do you manage the violent group within the nonviolent movement, or how do you manage the two flanks of the groups, and how do you deal with this two principles? So small victories and then violence, nonviolence. Cecilia.
So about small victories, I think we're talking about how to make that into bigger mobilizations. It's maintaining a lot like what Jem said, maintaining your relationships with these individuals. I think a lot of momentum is lost when people call for an activity, a lot of people show up, and then those people who show up are like left without any direction afterwards. So follow up with your activists is very important. And that's why things like, small victories are very important, and small activities, because being part of a social movement, being an activist is not just about, it's about the issues, but it's also about the community that you create doing it. As far as managing violence, I think a more important question is the fact that at this moment, one thing we see with both BLM as well as with the protests in Brazil is that it is the target, it is the government, or not necessarily the government in the US, but it is the status quo that we're trying to change, that tries really hard to paint activists as violent rather than the activists actually being violent. So when we think about BLM, first of all, the proportion of actual violence that has happened is super tiny and really, really blown up in a way to demonize all the activists. And number two, the vast majority of the violence has been provoked by the police and by law enforcement. And I think BLM has done a really good job at, calling out the moral equivalence of supposed frustration with violence, defining violence as breaking store windows versus actually killing people. And so we can't let the target make that false equivalence. Similarly, in Brazil, when the Corinthians first the football team made the first call for mobilization, all of the pro-government, like fake news sites, WhatsApp groups are calling them violent Antifas. We also, like, black is also the color of the team, so it was really convenient for them. And so we responded by everybody started calling themselves Antifas. Everybody started like posting, claiming to be Antifas. We have a number of, like, you know, the Antifa banner, which is like a circle with the flags in the middle. People started changing it to be like Antifa protester, Antifa gay, Antifa, not protester, Antifa professor, Antifa gay, Antifa sambista, Antifa chef. So using this violent labeling to backfire and also ridicule the demonization of the activists.
Yeah, this is a great and substantial answer, and of course I think we will talk about it a lot tomorrow. Well, Tuesday, when we have this BLM session, and I would like to outline a little bit more on importance of nonviolence. First, when Canvas teaches the principles of nonviolent struggle, we always point to the Holy Trinity. So you need to have unity and vision, and then you need to have planning, because there is no such thing as a randomly planned and successful movement. And then most important, you need to have a nonviolent discipline. So nonviolent discipline is a strategic approach to the thing. It has nothing to do with nonviolence as a noun, which is more related to the, you know, attitude, or it can be related to religion, it can be more related to the culture, but this is a strategic thing. So what we see is that nonviolent discipline is a skill. And this is a skill like driving a car. So if you can learn to drive the car, or if you can or cannot learn to drive the bicycle, I'm one of the persons who doesn't know how to ride the bicycle, you can learn about the nonviolent discipline too. So on one level, you can take a look at how you make a nonviolent discipline your culture in the movement. So whether you preach it by saying it from the day one, you actually introduced everybody to the ideas of the movement and say we are looking into nonviolence, where you have a strong religious background, something Gandhi has in his movement, something Polish Solidarity has during the time of their movement because of the strong Catholic discipline, something some cultures have in their own cultures, or just say to the people, you know, it's like if this is rational. If you use nonviolence, you have twice more chances to succeed. And there is an actual proof for this in a recent study by Maria Stefan and Erika Chenovet, which shows that movements that are predominantly nonviolent, and I'm not saying that nonviolence needs to be 100% exercised, there are movements that are predominantly nonviolent, still people throw stones and do things accidentally, but they don't resort to violence. They dismantle violence and they kind of preach on violence. These movements are twice more likely to succeed over the same course of time as the violent movements. So whether you preach it as a culture or something which is definitely more ethical, or you preach it from the point of common sense, it should be the culture in the movement. And the second thing is you can train people to stay nonviolent. You can train people to sit when they see police. You can pick the groups which are less likely to confront, to lead the protests. What we were doing very often in Serbia, because we had many people of faith, for example, we would put priests in the front ranks. They would be volunteering to go in the front ranks. Serbian movement was over 50% women participation. Women would lead protests, women would lead banners. We had disabled people in wheelchairs ready to lead protests. So imagine having a police rank and then have a line of women and people in wheelchairs and the priests. Why this is good? Because by that, you diminish the capability of violence starting from your own side, because if you have the violent elements or drunk idiots or agents provocateurs from your side ready to incite violence, they will need to go and attack women and people in a wheelchair and priests first before they attack the police. More importantly, you want to select the tactics which are less likely to end up in violence. So this is what we were looking at: less concentration, less blockades, less this type of protests we categorize as an intervention, and more of the things which are dispersed. Things like hitting pots and pans from the window, things are like graffiti, things like mass boycotts, things like mass petitions, things like people can do from different locations simultaneously without confronting the security forces. And very important thing, you need to know that there may be groups that share your commitment to the cause, but they don't share your commitment to the nonviolence. So take a look at any anti-globalist demonstration which occur regularly wherever you have a G8 summit. And then you have hundreds of thousands of people who stand for equality and against big corporations, well organized, in perfect order, in beautiful march. And then you have 5 to 7 people coming from anarchistic and black bloc organizations, start throwing stones, breaking cars. And of course, they get all the media attention. And then the rest of the movement can be labeled as violent. So people were looking at this and finding the way to disfranchise with these elements, and find a way to tape these elements and post them on the website in order to not only label them as violence, but also help security forces identify those that are trying to steal the show and break the cars. So with this notion, I will say, maybe I have a one sentence in the last question, which will be how do we move people from collectivism to activism? This is the whole training, this is the whole video among our cartoon training video. We take a look at the new media. There are some thrilling things. They definitely help as a platform for people to express themselves, to get together, to exchange knowledge, to learn. But there is a danger in this that, it's like because you like thing and you share thing, you think you did your job. The real campaigns are effective in the digital era only if they combine the things you do in the real world with the things you do in a digital world. I don't know how many of you remember Ice Bucket Challenge, but the reason why Ice Bucket Challenge, which was the campaign raising money and awareness about a very rare disease, best known by Stephen Hawking, is because not only that people were sharing it on the social media, it's because the people were doing something in the real world, like donating money for the research of the disease. And then the challenge word was challenging the people you really know to pour the water over yourself, which is the funky part, but also to add money and to add to the campaign. So this is the real world component. You donate money in the real world, you donate real money, you pour the water over your head in the real world, and then you challenge your real friend, not your Facebook friends, with the names that know you and that would be ashamed not to do the same. And then you dig into the world of the social media and you share it in the social media, and then it gets infectious over the place and people get to this idea. So any campaign you plan needs to have a leg in the real world, and then it can dig and dive into the digital world, and it needs to go back to the real world. And the third component is you need to constantly update people what is happening, how many people joined, as Tsatsi pointed, as Jen pointed. You need to keep your movement alive. Your movement is about the people. People need to be informed, people need to stay engaged. If people are not regularly communicated with, if people are not regularly invited to the things, they don't feel like they belong to the movement. And that can be an email, that can be a message, that can be a phone call in a time of social distancing. You don't necessarily need to meet the people in the real world, but you need to keep these people informed. And this is how you maintain morale. You also give them credits for any victories they achieve before you invite them to do something else for you. Otherwise, you end up with people being dragged to the protests over and over, and until they are exhausted and they don't want to do this anymore because they don't feel the sense, but more important, they don't feel the ownership and belonging to the movement. With this notion, it's 5:30 in Belgrade. I'll tell you how grateful I am for all of you for participating in this. I would like to send a round of applause to our beautiful panel. Thank you guys. All of your stories are important. Keep up the good work. You're the inspiration for the rest of us. I will invite you strongly to participate in our next week's sessions. On Tuesday, same time, we have the one about the protests in America with some really thrilling speakers, and from activists to real experts in the field. And then the next Friday, we have one on dilemma actions and creativity and use of humor. We get a lot of traffic in Canvas on this, so we decided to launch a serious research on how humor and dilemma actions affect nonviolent struggle. I'll give you the big goodbye. Thank you for being here with us, and thanks for everybody in Canvas for making this possible.
Thank you, guys. Bye and stay safe.